In this video, I'm going to read a complaint I sent in to the health authority about one of my stays in the psych ward. Keep in mind, I had 2 really good psych ward stays before this bad experience. So this is more contrasting a bad experience with 2 really good experiences and a bad outcome with 2 really good outcomes. And this is just psych ward specific. This isn't my experience in community mental health. In the 5 years I experienced community mental health, I had 99.99999% good experiences, all great people. But what I really saw from this experience was how all of that can be destroyed very quickly by the psych ward. And I'm not saying it's all their fault, but I also feel like it was a learning experience I was meant to go through. So I don't think it was a mistake by the universe to put me through that, because I'd had sort of all these fairy tale experiences in the mental health system, if you can imagine. And then this really terrible one happened and really opened my eyes to what is really going on for people and could be going on for people. And a lot of people are having really great experiences, but the trouble is that I don't think there's room for this much error in how some really terrible experiences happen for people, because the results can be catastrophic. It's the difference between life and death. And so that's what I saw with this experience in the psych ward, and since then I've moved as far away from it as I can because I'm really afraid. And so yeah, I just want to share this, but it doesn't have any reflection on community mental health. If anything, I think community mental health could do their job even better if they didn't have to clean up the mess of what happens in the psych ward. So what they do is even more amazing, considering that the culture is night and day compared to the psych ward, and then that great culture of community mental health has to clean up the mess that is created in the psych ward. So it was meant to be, it was meant to happen. It's part of what inspired me to go to California and live my dreams and leave working in the mental health system for a while, and going to California led me to taper off my medication. So it's all good. I am writing this not so much as a complaint, but as feedback to initiate change. Actually, it's both a complaint and a compliment. I have been so fortunate to receive and participate in the very best of what mental health services have to offer and the people that work in the field. I'm truly grateful and blessed. I write this as feedback because of the experiences I outline in this letter. I write this as feedback as because of the experiences I outline in this letter, I have seen that my health and wellness can be compromised by the very people trained, employed, and trusted to help me when I'm most vulnerable. Fortunately, in my experience, what I share now seems to be a bad egg scenario, as it is contrary to the majority. I write this because I've realized it only takes one bad egg to nearly destroy the life I have rebuilt, not due to progression of illness, but due to treatment that made me worse instead of better. In my case, the suffering could have been avoided. It has taken me some time to recover enough from the trauma and turmoil of what I feel was mistreatment to have the determination to speak up in a way that might help initiate change that may be beneficial. I was admitted to the psych ward on April 4th, 2016. I was terrified, dissociated from reality, and confused. I knew when my friend showed up, where 3 of my family members stood around me, I needed to go to the hospital. I had been at this hospital twice before, and even though I was very distressed, I knew that I would feel safer and be able to heal at the psych ward, just like before. I had no fear of the psych ward itself or how I would be treated there. My previous hospitalization was in October of 2015. I was there for 8 days, and then I was discharged to a step-down facility where I spent 2 nights. I realized I didn't need to be there any longer and went home. I took 1 more week off work, and then I returned to my regular duties. The time before that was in February of 2015. I was in the hospital for 10 days. 2 days after I was out of the hospital, I spent a week in RAP facilitator training. When I was hospitalized those 2 times, my doctor was Dr. A. Dr. A was very helpful, both in her caring demeanor, respectful communication, and short and non-invasive treatment protocol. I felt strong rapport and complete trust. I was so thankful that she was able to help me while I was in the psych ward to calm down and reconnect with reality. She used medications to help me reconnect, and when I was feeling better, she promptly reduced those extra medications and then stopped them. To me, this shows that she realized that although I was extremely stressed, confused, and in a crisis, I was not necessarily more ill, requiring more long-term medications. I learned a lot about myself in that I can have a bump in the road, recover my wellness very quickly, and get on with it. Both times I was in the hospital with her as my doctor, she listened to me, collaborated with me, and got me back on my feet quickly. Her wonderful approach unfortunately set me up for the horrible experience I had in April of 2016. I say that because I had no idea what I was getting myself into as a patient of another doctor. I felt safe going to that particular hospital because of Dr. A, but I did not know what would happen if she was not my doctor. On April 4th, 2016, I was admitted to the psych ward. I became very distressed quite quickly after working too much, losing someone in my community, and feeling cornered once in the back of a tattoo shop. The distress resulted in PTSD, which can make me disconnect from reality and lead to so-called psychosis. I was in the hospital for 19 days. I was discharged to a step-down facility and stayed there 2 weeks. That's a total of 33 days in a facility compared to 10 days the previous 2 times. And the difference was the medication I was given and the way I was approached by the doctor. Dr. Zed wanted to put me on olanzapine. I told her that I had a bad reaction to it 5 years ago. I had an akathisia reaction and was very close to jumping off a bridge. She said she would put me on Seroquel XR, which is slow release, which from my understanding means intended for long-term use. They don't put somebody on extended release just for 8 to 10 days. Recall when I said Dr. A gave me extra medication with the intention for me to take it briefly just while I was in the psych ward. That she did, and my stay in the ward was just that, brief. Not only was it brief, I felt better and better as the few days went by, and then I left and got back to my life. Dr. Zed said I was going to be tapered up to 800 milligrams of Seroquel XR. I knew it was a different Seroquel when I heard the dose, and I had not been on more than 150 milligrams a day before. Also, it would have taken several days for me to get up to this 800 milligram dose. I did not want this treatment plan, and I was vocal in expressing this. Dr. Zed would not listen. I asked to switch to Dr. A, and she said no, without explanation. Why would I not be allowed to switch to a doctor whom I already have rapport with, who I do not have to retell and explain my story to, has seen me before twice and knows my history, and who helped me get back on my feet quickly in the past? This was my request, and in my mind it was not an unreasonable one. If anything, it would make things easier for everyone. Me, the doctor, the psych ward, and everybody waiting in line to get a bed. I asked her to consult with Dr. A or find out my previous history. She refused. I asked if I could speak to both her and Dr. A at the same time, and she actually laughed while she said, "No, you can't speak to us together." There was no resolve except for that of Dr. Zed's. I cannot describe the desperation and hopelessness I experienced. I was afraid for my life after being put on Seroquel XR and feeling worse with each day. It was no different to how I felt on olanzapine, as I had the same awful feeling inside. I basically tried to advocate for what was in the crisis plan portion of my wellness recovery action plan. I'm not sure what the point is of having a crisis plan if there's no way to carry it out when the time comes. There has been a lot of effort put into making sure people have a wrap, and when it comes to crisis, it is of no value. I knew that this treatment plan was not right for me based on my past history, and at no point did I feel better. I was started on a certain dose, and I only felt worse and worse as the days went on. I felt less like myself, more afraid, and had more terrifying inner experiences. This could be interpreted as worsening of my mental illness, but considering when I was off that medication, I felt back to myself. It was the medication. It was a battle to get off the medication that was making me worse, and it felt like a battle for my life. A friend of mine told me she visited me on day 8, and I was the most paranoid she'd ever seen me. Keep in mind, previously by day 8, I was either being discharged or close to being discharged from the hospital. I tried to ask the nurses to tell Dr. Z that I would like to switch to Dr. A. Each one of them informed me that they had no power to even have that conversation with the doctor. I felt even more helpless, as not even the nurses could help me. Why can't nurses advocate for the patients? At some point it came to my mind in conversation with a nurse that there were circumstances that I could switch doctors due to conflict of interest with Dr. Z. I believe that I then informed Dr. Z of this and said it was conflict of interest, that she was my doctor. I was way less lucid at this point, as I was on more of the medication she prescribed, so I do not remember what she said. Within a short period of time, I was informed that I was transferred to Dr. A. I was feeling so relieved and still in shock after being switched that I stayed on the medication Dr. Z prescribed for a day or two before having a conversation with Dr. A about being tapered off. I spoke with Dr. A and said something along the lines of, I realized that most doctors would say that I have to give this medication time. I need to get up to the prescribed effective dose, etc. But this medication does not agree with me. You've seen me before, and you see how I'm not doing better this time. Can you please taper me off this medication? At that point, I was on 500 milligrams of Seroquel XR. Dr. A listened, she heard me, and then she replied saying she would taper me down and see how it went. I do not know the time frame, but when I left the hospital on the 19th day, I was on 200 milligrams of Seroquel XR. I went to the step-down facility for 14 days, and when I left there, I was on 100 milligrams. I tapered down to 50 and then 0 milligrams with the help of my psychiatrist in the community. As the dose was lowered, I felt better. To me, this was an ordeal as a result of being put on medication that was detrimental. This could have been avoided as I knew this was going to happen beforehand. This was not recovery from a mental illness, but from a bad reaction to medication. A medication that would not have been used had I been switched to Dr. A immediately. I requested the switch as soon as I did not agree with the treatment program. I was put on it anyway and was in the hospital and the step-down facility for 33 days instead of perhaps 10. The days are less relevant than the amount of suffering I endured, not only from the medication I was given making me worse than anything I had ever experienced since my first experience with long-term antipsychotics 5.5 years ago, but also from the uncaring, paternalistic, dismissing, and condescending way I was treated. Not only that, it took me months to return to work at very minimal duties. I actually wrote and sent my resignation letter, and this was not because of mental illness. I am afraid to work too hard and stress myself out as it could lead to the hospital. Now I live in fear of the hospital. I don't know if I can go through something like that again. Due to my involvement in mental health, I've heard there is talk about movement towards person-centeredness. In my mind, if there are not ways to mirror this in the psych ward, the community effort will be largely compromised, as trust, rapport, and being heard are all central. How can someone who is traumatized by the psych ward trust and utilize the services in the community to the fullest extent? This compromises people's recovery going forward and puts them in more danger. I feel like this is now true for myself. Why did it have to be conflict of interest for me to be able to switch doctors? What if I wouldn't have thought to say this? Where would I be now? I think it was only in dialogue with the nurses that I was able to come up with this way out of Dr. Z's care. What about the people who are not able to advocate for themselves in this same way? It's sad to say that I have had to take steps to protect myself from future events like this. I have created a representation agreement as well as an advance directive. I did not know, nor did I ever imagine, I would need to spend hours of my life researching how to protect myself against the system that is supposed to be of service to me regarding my mental health. In my mind, this will not just protect me from mistreatment in the psych ward, but also from myself. What I mean by that is that next time I'm in a crisis, I do not know if I can trust myself to actually call for help. I have always called for help, knowing that the help I will receive will do more good than harm. In April, there was more harm than good, and the principle of first do no harm was most certainly violated. I also feel I narrowly escaped, as what if I would not have been able to switch to Dr. A and be tapered off the compromising medication? By having an advance directive, if I do have a crisis, I will somewhere in my mind and heart feel safer knowing I'm less likely to be violated in these ways. Perhaps I will have a voice when my voice is not being heard and I'm not seen as having some lucidity worth listening to. I realize that the advance directive does not guarantee this, though it is the best that is available that I am aware of. What disturbs me the most is knowing that now I do not feel safe calling for the help that is supposed to keep me safe. I really do not know what my future holds and if I will even call for help. I may think of not calling for help as safer than the possibility of being cared for by a doctor who does not listen, is not willing to collaborate, laughs at my requests, is condescending, and puts me on medication that is detrimental, that make me appear more mentally ill, which seems to justify this need for overtreatment. This is a terrifying vicious circle that I refuse to be subjected to. The fact that I have not been on any Seroquel XR for 6 months, now over a year, nor have I been on any antipsychotics except for the 10 days in hospital over the past 5 years shows me that it's not the right or best option for me. I knew this and I tried to tell her that, and she would not listen. If I was still on it, I would appear more ill as a result of being on the wrong treatment. How much of short-term distress is turned into something worse than it needs to be in this way? I am so grateful to Dr. A for showing me how quickly I can get through short-term distress. In this way, I have stigmatized myself less, knowing that it was just a bump. When I'm in distress, I do indeed have some strong misconceptions in my thinking and feeling. Since Dr. A reconnects me out of that domain of trauma so fast, I don't add extra shame to my experiences of that. Since it's so quick, I know that it's not who I am. Until this time, I had not had any bad experiences, except for perhaps my very first hospital admission 5 years ago. I'm writing this with both the example of what great care looks like, how it minimizes stay length, and allows one to move on, and the example of how terrible care creates terrible outcomes. I can't help but wonder how many people die because in their desperate moments they were afraid to call for help, as past help was seen as not helpful at all. How many people get to that point of desperation because they were not allowed to be collaborative partners in their treatment decisions and have some power in their very own life, even in their not so lucid moments? How many people would rather die than go back to the psych ward? How many people end their life thinking that they are evil because their distress is made worse by treatment and not better? We will never know because we can no longer ask them. I hope that it's never a thought that enters my head. Just know that if I ever do take my life, as 20% of people with my diagnosis do, that the thought will have entered my mind that help is worse than death, as maybe I won't be able to get out of the care of a non-person-centered doctor next time. Please take whatever steps necessary to ensure that people's wishes are respected and heard. Not just wishes, but people in crisis have the information about what worked best previously, often in a wrap crisis plan. I'm writing this not only for myself, but for the ones I can imagine do not have the opportunity to advocate for themselves to the extent that I do. It pains me to imagine the possibilities that my peers go through if I extrapolate my experience to include others. As a peer, that is what I do, as that is the lens through which I see. It is assumed we share these common experiences, not just symptoms of mental illness, but also the fact that treatments can make things worse. Often this, then, justifies the means. When the help does more harm than good, I begin to question. Please take steps to ensure that in our moments of desperation, we feel safe calling for help. I am happy to say that I'm doing better than ever thanks to Dr. A for listening to me about tapering off Seroquel XR. I have been working blah 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 blah, now I'm in California, woot. So that was the letter I wrote in probably November of 2016, and I got a response to it recently. That wasn't the greatest. I talked a little bit about that, but hopefully that illustrates some of the things that happen in a really bad experience and what comes out of that. And fortunately, I've been able to self-direct myself through an experience of crisis without going to the hospital, and then at this point now, self-direct myself off of all medications. And I'm not sure how long that'll last. Maybe it will invite a new wave of distress, and I'm in the process of preparing myself to go through that without relying on medications, if and when it does come. I want to read something else I wrote, and it's more about peer support